That was Susan. Thank you.
I just heard recording in progress.
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Marilyn Turkovich. I'm the Executive Director of the Charter for Compassion. And welcome to April's Golden Global Read. And it is actually Earth Day. So this is a very special opportunity for us to have this this global read. I'm so sorry, I keep going back to Golden Rule Day, which we had April 5th, and you would think that I know that that has passed. But we offer the global read every single month, and this month we're very pleased to have with us Marcel Von Osten, and he has done the most incredible book called Mother. It is one of those tabletop books, but it's more than that. And as the subtitle says, it's a tribute to Mother Earth, and it is a fantastic tribute. Today, beside Marcel, who is the primary photographer of, obviously not the primary, the sole photographer in this work, we have John Colkin, who is going to be the facilitator. And John is also going to be with us in December for his own book, which he might mention. John and I have been working for the last few years on a compassion exhibit that is now in full swing. He might even mention that because some of our various compassionate cities, communities might be interested in bringing that exhibit to your local area. John is a medical doctor, but also an incredible photographer in his own right. So I'm going to turn this over to John now for the introduction of Marcel. And please, as always, if you have reflections, if you have questions, enter them into the chat box, and then I'll make certain that, that John and others see that. Thank you. John?
Well, Marilyn, thanks very much. That's really kind of you to get all this started. And really, I know I speak for Marcel also when we thank both you, Lynn, and other members of the Charter for putting all this together. And you're right, it's a great pleasure to have Marcel with us today. He's an extraordinary artist. I say that with great sincerity, and I happen to have actually a copy of his incredible book that we're going to be talking about today that we'll get into in more detail a little later. Just so everyone knows, we're going to probably take about the first 30 minutes just for a conversation that Marcel and I will have, and then we're going to open it up to queries and just kind of take it with that for the remainder of the hour. So with that in mind, first, Marcel, welcome. For those of you who don't know, he's down there in South Africa right now and just got off of safari. For those of you, again, who don't know him very well, haven't had a chance to read a little bit about his biography, he's Dutch, he's a wildlife photographer. He has an incredible, very supportive wife, Danielle, and he's been working on this particular project for at least 15 years now. He's won an incredible number of international awards: Wildlife Photographer of the Year, International Nature Photographer of the Year, Travel Photographer of the Year, and I'm sure that's just the tip of the iceberg. So without further ado, first of all, welcome, Marcel, for being here. And I'd like to just start without even diving into the book at first, but if you can just share with us a little bit about what's inspired you to travel around the world for over 15 years now in very remote and challenging environments, and photographing wildlife. What's the essence? What's led to all that?
Oh, well, thank you, John, for that introduction. And let me start by thanking everyone for inviting me. It's an honor to be here. I've always loved nature from being a small child. Always watched nature documentaries with my family. Always loved being outside. And once I started traveling for the first time outside of Europe, that's when I realized that there's an entire world out there that I didn't know before. And then on my honeymoon with my wife Daniela, that's when I got first into contact with like wildlife on safari in Tanzania, and that's really what kickstarted it. So that's when I just became obsessed with wildlife.
Well, what about it even more? Was there something about the personality of the animals, and were there certain animals that you were more attracted to than others? Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, at first I just loved everything. I just loved the entire experience of being outdoors. But then very quickly I started feeling that there's certain subjects or certain animals that I feel more attracted to. So in my case, as a photographer, it was the bigger animals for very specific photographic reasons. But especially the cats, big cats is a cliche, but it still really attracted me. Elephants. Those kind of animals really spoke to me. So I can it's a subject that I will never get tired of. So I just keep returning to photograph them.
You talk, it sounds like these are all mammals. Do you see any connection there, or to you as a human, or tell us more about that?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, because you're right. I actually like to photograph mammals much more than, for instance, birds or reptiles. And I think that's one of the reasons easier to relate to mammals than to birds. Also in terms of expressions. So when you look at animals, a lot of them actually have different expressions. Birds don't. Birds don't have only two expressions: beak open and beak closed, and that's it. and like even a tiger or a bear can have all kinds of different expressions, and obviously, especially primates and monkeys. Those are the ones that are obviously closely related to us, and that's something that doesn't go unnoticed when you're photographing them.
Yeah, I mean, and people haven't seen your photographs yet. Some haven't, others may have. They're extraordinary, but I think a picture is worth 1,000 words in this case. So would you mind sharing with us some of these incredible images? Anything else that you want to share? I know we can do a share screen here. So would you mind doing that?
I don't mind at all. I'm going to
Wonderful.
do that right now. Let's
Great.
see. There we go. All right. So just a very quick overview of what I do. This is clearly me, where I like to be best. So this is in the swamps in Louisiana, photographing trees in this case. This is one of my most popular images ever. It's also one of my first publications in National Geographic. And I love this image to death, also because it's exactly what I try to achieve in my photography, which is impressive landscapes with an animal in it. And I liked it so much that I made it the cover of my book.
Why is it that you like images with both animals and the landscape in them? Is there a particular reason?
Yeah, there is. So I actually like to photograph both. So I like to photograph wildlife and I also like to photograph landscapes. But I think that showing the animal in its natural habitat is the most interesting to me. So I generally don't photograph a lot of super close-ups. I do, but when I can, I will always try to include a lot of the landscape, because it's the landscape that gives so much context to the animal, and the landscape without the animal always feels a little bit empty to me.
Mhm.
So just to have that, even if it's small, like here, it's actually tiny. It's not even like 5% of the image, but yet it brings that entire landscape to life.
Thank you.
Yeah. This is also from my early days. So one of my early photographs that was also published in National Geographic magazine in Madagascar. And here I do the same thing, but then with people. So here is a local person on an ox cart in Madagascar. I over the years I made some images that went viral, and they'll pop up everywhere. So if you Google lion roaring or something or attacking, this will most likely pop up. Here's another one that went very viral. It went so viral that actually it's in the Instagram. If you want to add an icon in your story, then this is one of them that you can add. So those are the images that really did a lot for me, but I prefer images more like this. So very organized and very graphic. Here's another one. This is probably as minimalist and as graphic as you can go. So this is always what I'm aiming for. I have a history in graphic design, so I'm naturally drawn to these kinds of compositions. This is something similar, even though it's totally in the wild in Zambia. I'm not just trying to photograph an elephant because that's not very difficult, but I'm trying to photograph it in a unique way. So here, that is, it's all the habitat basically. So what's leading for me is the trees. It's the landscape, and the elephant is something that brings it to life. And if you add both of them together, you get something that's more than the sum of its parts. And here you see me doing something similar, but then in a landscape. So again, I'm using a very small element to bring the landscape to life and to add scale to the image.
Mhm.
Here's another example, also with a person. This is a Tuareg that I photographed in Libya, in the southwestern corner of Libya, in the Akakus desert. And you asked me earlier what drives me to travel and to go to all these different places. This is one of the things that I really like to do. It's to discover. So to go out there, and even though most people on the planet think there's nothing left to discover on this planet, there's actually still a lot. It just takes more effort nowadays to find those places. And this is one of those examples of a landscape that well, basically hardly anyone has ever seen, and that's because it's extremely difficult to get there. This is in Chad. My favorite cat is a leopard. I just think they're so beautiful and so elegant and well proportioned, and everything about the leopard makes perfect sense to me. And so those are at the top of my list to photograph, but also other cats. Tigers, absolutely love, also so beautiful. Here's another one with a cub. It just instantly grabs you, I think. So love that. Like I said, also I like to photograph landscapes, and then I like to also always try to make it look different than what's already out there, like what I did here early morning during fog. Using heavy backlight to create those beams. And this is also a way to try to be creative with the camera by using deliberately slow shutter speeds to add a painterly feel to the photograph. These are pelicans off the coast of Namibia. This is more recent work with a remote controlled camera of a rhino. The images like this are dear to me because it's actually quite rare nowadays to see rhinos with a full horn, and especially with a horn of this size. Most game reserves all over the world actually proactively dehorn the rhinos so that they become worthless to poachers. And it's a sad sight because we're getting used to seeing rhinos without a horn.
Hmm.
So this is a dear image to me, as well as the next one. It's very rare to see a rhino with a horn of that size nowadays, because that's worth a whole lot of money. Rhino horn is worth more than gold at the moment. So per pound or per ounce or whatever.
Hmm.
So this is a close-up. This was photographed in Indonesia. It's a black-crested macaque. And this is also something that I really like to do, is photographing species that are less known to people, especially if there's a story connected to them. And in this case, it's an endangered species because of habitat loss and because the locals are eating them. And for the same reason, I wanted to photograph these beautiful monkeys. When I went to photograph them, hardly anyone had ever heard of them or seen photographs of them, yet they are also a very endangered species. And one of the things that I try to do with my photography is to bring awareness to a species like this, because successful conservation starts with awareness. So if people don't know that something is threatened, then it's not very likely that any action is going to be taken to prevent it from going extinct. Oops. Yeah, this is another example where I use a lot of habitat and the same species smaller in the frame, just to give context to where this species live. Big mammal. I like this kind of contrast between cute and horrific. And this is one of my most popular recent images that will also be used for the Remembering Wildlife book series to get funding for nature conservation. And that's it. So that's a bit what I do. I'll stop sharing. All right.
Well, that's just stunning. You know, Marcel, I'm clapping for everyone else. Bravo. Just really stunning and just emotional. You know, you can't, at least for me, I can't help but just connect with them. And when you talk about them in their environment and mammals, I think, at least for me, it's something I can connect with. I can connect the dots of, you know, our interconnection, our dependence on each other. The list goes on and on. So thank you so much. Thank you so much for showing those. And that kind of leads me into this question about the book itself. You know, like you've kind of touched on this a little bit, but can you tell us a little bit more about what are some of the key messages that you're trying to convey through the book? What inspired you to do this particular book?
Yeah, so there's basically two reasons for me to make this book. One of them is I thought it was time to create like an overview of the work that I've done over the past 15 years. And nothing is better than a book, I think, for that. But I didn't just want it to be a pretty book with pretty images, and that's that. So I really wanted to use my presence in the online and in the media to also teach people about what they're looking at and explain what's going on with our planet. We all know that our planet is facing a lot of threats from all different angles, and climate change being one of them. But there's a lot more going on, and especially with wildlife, there's so many threats, and there's so many species that go extinct even daily, and also a lot of larger species that we all know that are heavily under threat, and most people are not aware. And so I'm using the images in my book to explain what those threats are, where they're coming from, and hopefully this will how do you call it, make people more active with regards to wildlife conservation.
Yeah, and I know one of the things that you and I had a conversation about this before, and I know you talk about it a little bit in the book, is the concept of where is the threat coming from, and is it necessarily coming from the places or the things that we normally think about? Would you mind going into that a little bit more?
Yeah, so if you look at all the animals that are threatened or endangered, the threats that they're facing have a lot of similarities. They often have to do with climate change. However, that's just one of many. One of the most common threats is actually habitat loss.
Mhm.
So that's either because of deforestation, for instance, for agriculture,
Mhm.
or it's just for buildings and houses and cities, etc. So that's one of the biggest habitat loss or habitat fragmentation. And the other one that's big is poaching and hunting, and also eating of certain species. So as strange as the concept of eating monkeys may be to us, there's a lot of places in the world where eating a monkey is actually very normal, which may not be a problem, but it becomes a problem when that species getting close to extinction because of that.
Yeah, it's interesting, timing wise. I just got an email this morning from someone who saw some of my work at an exhibition, and it's the photograph. It's a drawing of half pig, half dog, and it says, "Why do we eat one and love the other?" And the person was asking me about that, and I was saying, well, when I've been to doing medical work in Vietnam back in the 90s, it's normal, it's natural to eat dogs. It's kind of like, what do we get used to, and what do we think is acceptable, and what's not?
Yeah, I totally agree with you. It's in many ways it's irrational to eat the one and not the other, and it's very much a cultural thing. I've been to markets in Indonesia where there's cages full of little puppies, not for pets, but for food. You know?
Right. Yeah, we have about 7 more minutes before we're going to open it up for questions, and then we may have some time, depending on how many questions there are, for me to pepper you with a few more. But one of the things I wanted to make sure that we covered was this concept of, okay, there are all kinds of things going on around the world, all sorts of things we could potentially get involved in, that we can also get upset about. But sometimes if we get too dispersed, it can cause to, empathic distress and burnout. So do you have some advice? You've managed to stay focused on what you're doing extraordinarily well. I mean, the results of your work show that. So do you have any advice for people about how to stay focused on something that they think is important? And specifically also when it has to do with wildlife, are there specific things?
Yeah, I think there's so many things that you can do to help, and it doesn't need to be like big. It can be small things. I would say that probably the most important thing is that you like your political choice. Obviously, is very important because it's usually the government of your country that decides how much money they're going to spend on either fighting climate change or how much money they're going to spend on wildlife or nature conservation. So I think that's probably the most important one. And then other than that, there's so many organizations in the world that are trying to do the right thing, that are trying to save these species from going extinct. So you can also like pick a few and donate even a small amount, because a lot of those small amounts together will mean that that organization might accomplish more than they can do now. And also sharing news about nature conservation or about an animal that is endangered will also help, because like I mentioned earlier, successful conservation starts with awareness. So awareness is really important, and that's what you can use, for instance, social media for, to just make people aware that, for instance, lions are getting threatened in their existence, and cheetahs and giraffe, and people just don't know. They think it's only tigers and that it's only polar bears, but there's a lot of species that are struggling, and it's important that people know. And just by telling them or sharing that kind of information with others, you can already well, open doors in the good direction.
Yeah, one of the things that it was struck me about your photographs, and you and I spoke about this a little bit earlier, was that you really tend to focus on the beauty. One of the things I've heard from some of these different foundations that are trying to protect animals is that they found that when they showed images which were graphically horrific, even though that's part of the reality, the amount of donations was not very high. But when they could show the beauty of animals in nature and the humanity, if you want to call it, of animals and their emotions and whatnot, the amount of donations went up. So from a science perspective and a psychological perspective, motivating people through your work is just really, a great gift that you've shared with us. So I really appreciate that. We have about 3 more minutes before we're going to open it up. I know one other thing that you've spoken about before, and looking at the background where you are there right now, it's a fairly minimalist background. What do we need in our lives in order to be happy, both internally and surrounding us externally? Would you mind commenting on that a little bit?
Yeah, no, yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, I like minimalism, so not only in my work as a photographer, but also in my house. So as you can see behind me, there's no colors in my house. Everything is it's just about shapes and contrast. So there's only black, white, and different shades of gray. But I also like minimalism in my thinking. I like to keep things organized, and but one of the things that I learned in my job as an international wildlife photographer, going all over the planet, is how little I actually need. And before this, I worked in advertising, and I was promoting. I was encouraging people to buy stuff, and that's what I did for 15 years as an art director. And I also had a lot of stuff myself. And then when I started traveling and photographing, for years on end, we didn't even have a home. We just traveled, and we both had a large suitcase, and that's everything we had. And then after a few years, we realized, this is basically all we need: some clothing, shoes, and just food and drinks and shelter, but really nothing more. So yeah, I think that's also important to realize that it's not about the stuff.
Amen. So with that, let's turn it over to Marilyn. I know there have been some questions that have come up in the chat box, and she's our master of ceremonies for the queries in the chat box. So Marilyn, would you mind firing away?
No, I don't mind at all. And I mean, one of these came from me, and it's not a question. It was just, as you were going through the pictures, I found myself, thank goodness I was off, and I had my mute on, because I found myself, having these incredible, feelings that were coming out of my mouth. And Kate here says that, these images are so incredible. And so there's, the logical question. I mean, how do you set these up? I don't think you say to the lion, would you just, show me your angry look? How do these pictures find their way into your camera? Are they, do you wait for incredible amount of time in order to get a picture, or is there no formula?
No, there's definitely a formula. So the most important thing to realize is that as a wildlife photographer, I have little to no influence over my subjects. So unlike a fashion or like a fashion photographer, yeah, you can say to the model, like, move to the left or move to the right. The animals never listen to what I say, nor do they have any idea about photography. So the only thing that I can do is I can really study and learn about their behavior in an effort to maybe predict what they're going to do. That's one. And the other one you mentioned, that's correct, is patience. If that's one thing that wildlife photographers have, it's tons and tons of patience and determination. So we keep trying and we keep being patient. So the images that I showed you, that's really like some of the best images that I shot and the result of 15 years of trying. So that's not something that I usually get in like one visit. So it often takes more than one visit. And then even still, a large part of it is just luck. Because I have no influence on the behavior of a wild animal. So when that lion charged my remote controlled camera, I didn't know that it was going to do that. It just did, and that's how I got that shot. So in that way, I was just extremely lucky to be there at that time. So it's a little bit of a combination of all those things. A lot of learning, a lot of patience, and a lot of luck.
Yeah, there was the curious question, and that is, how did that monkey get the phone?
Yeah, so that monkey is a Japanese macaque, also known as a snow monkey. They live in Japan in one very small valley in the mountains, and it's a valley that has natural hot springs, and they're the only known primates that go into these hot springs for fun, just like people do, which is very interesting, I think. As a result, it's very popular location for people to go to. So tourists also go there. And I was there once, and there was a bus of Chinese tourists, and there was one lady with her iPhone, and she wanted to make close-up photographs of this particular monkey. So she was holding her phone very close to the monkey, and closer and closer and closer, up until the moment that the monkey thought, this must be a gift. So he snatched it from her hands and then moved away into the hot spring, and then actually immediately dunked it into the water and started playing with it. And this is the only frame that I got where it's holding the phone like a human would do it.
Yeah. It is amazing, the curiosity of animals. I remember I had gone to treetops in Kenya, and the warning was, don't leave your window open unless you're right there. And I looked out the window of my little room, and I saw a monkey just had opened someone's suitcase and was throwing everything from the suitcase out. So I think, it is the curious nature of us all.
Yes.
One question here is, what organizations are you connected to? I'm assuming conservation organizations, wildlife organizations. And I think you answered the second part of this, but I'll read it anyway. How can an average person be involved in conservation?
Yeah, so to start with the last one, there's just so many. It's hard to start somewhere. What I usually advise people is that to pick a subject that they care about. So either that's, for instance, a specific region, or it can be a specific animal. And then when you search for that animal that is endangered, you'll see that there's all kinds of foundations and organizations that are focused on saving that particular animal. So, for instance, to like big cats, in Africa, there is a foundation called Born Free, and that is an organization that that tries to help lions and save them from captivity, for instance. So that's a very good one. I forgot the first part of your question.
The first one was, let me just scroll back up, and that is how can the average person become involved? I think you have really addressed that. Yeah. And are there specific organizations that you might recommend to the average person, perhaps to school children or maybe even organizations?
Yeah. Again, what I would do is I would start with something that you're really passionate about. Yeah. Because I know people that are very passionate about the oceans and everything that lives in it. And obviously the ocean is also facing a ton of threats. So there's quite a lot of organizations that are trying to do their best to for positive change there. So then you can just pick one of them. I don't know from the top of my head one that I'm going to like promote, but that's the way that I would go about, so that you also for yourself, that you feel that you're doing something about a region or an animal that you care about.
Here's just a comment. I love that you not only share these amazing images, but that you're educating at the same time. Thank you for that. Do you get locals to show you these intimate places, or do you just wonder about?
Oh, that's a very good question. So no, it's I never wonder about, because that would be a horrible waste of my time. So what I always do when I go to a place, I will hire people, so specialists, so that can be local guides, or there can be local researchers or biologists who know the area or who know the subject much better than I do. And I use them to help me to find the species and to photograph them. Because if I just go myself, that makes very little sense. I would not be very efficient.
Yeah. Can you reflect on the connections you have with the animals that you photograph? What have you learned from them?
So yeah, I think the one thing that you learn is that you're one of them. Huh? That's probably the most impactful one. That if you're looking at a wild animal and it's looking straight back at you, you can't help but feel a connection. And especially with primates, that is just very very touching. I've once been touched by a primate who just was a baby one, who grabbed my finger like that with its little hands, and that is hard to explain. That to see those tiny little fingers, it's just like a human baby. So those are moments that you realize, these are not just animals. They're one of us, basically. So yeah, I think that's the most profound feeling that you can get.
This one is really very much a follow-up question. Are animals ever aware of you being near them, or that you're photographing them, or obviously doing something there?
Yeah, I would say most of the time, yes, they are aware that I'm there, because animals their senses are way better than ours. They can often see much better. They can smell better. They can hear better. We are very poor at our with our senses. So most of the time they know I'm there. And if they are super wild and not used to human presence, that means that I have to stay far away and I use very long lenses. A lot of times the species are not very skittish. So for instance, on Antarctica, the animals on Antarctica have never been hunted. So they have no negative experiences with people, which is why they are totally not afraid of you. They just walk straight up you, and it's because of that. It probably used to be like that very long time ago, but it's just because of how humans are treating animals that animals have become very skittish. in general. And the second answer to that question is sometimes I try to be invisible. So I just returned from a trip here in my own country, here in South Africa, where I spent several nights in a hide where I was completely invisible. They couldn't see me, hear me, or smell me. And that was the only way to photograph them during the night from super close.
Wow. What was the most difficult photograph you have taken, and what's been the easiest?
The easiest, I've too many examples of easiest, because easiest are always the ones that just happen, and I just happen to be there, and I only have to press the shutter button. So doesn't happen often, but still many times. The uneasy ones are either difficult because it's just difficult to find that species, but I've also photographed quite a few things that are just extremely difficult to watch. So an example is, for instance, a tiger cub that is being eaten by another tiger, which is not fun. And another example is I've seen a baby elephant being attacked by a pride of lions, and then it took them an hour to kill it while it was screaming. And so those moments are very, very intense. It's very easy to want to look away, but for me it's really important to actually watch that, because I think that is all part of nature. And I think for me as a wildlife photographer, I need to see exactly what's going on in nature, even though I decide not to share it with the viewers.
Okay, another comment. A remote control camera. No wonder you're still here. Okay. Okay. I think we've gone through the questions.
All right.
And I was just thinking when you were talking about the Arctic, that must be true of the Galapagos as well.
Yes,
Yeah.
same reason.
Yeah.
No, it's protected, and because it's protected, there's generations of wildlife there that have never been hunted and never been harassed. That's really all it takes for us to have like a harmonious relationship with nature. So in a sense, in Antarctica, the first time I was there, it was wonderful, but at the same time, I thought it was very depressing, because it just made me realize just that, like, what have we done? That there's only basically these two places left where the animals are so relaxed with our presence, and in the rest of the world they run for their lives.
Mhm. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, Marcel, you've obviously been working in this kind of mode for a number of years. And one of the things that I'd like to ask you about is that, how do you keep things fresh? How do you keep coming up with how does the creative process continue and keep you stimulated and motivated?
I think for a large part that is just my natural curiosity. So I'm just a very curious person, and I just like to discover things. Also, I like to create things that are fresh and new, so that drives me to find these exotic places and to photograph exotic animals. Also has to do with my background in advertising, where being original was the most important thing as a creative. So I think it's a little bit of a combination of all of that. Also, I tend to think about my own mortality and the fact that I have a limited amount of time, and combined with that curiosity, that creates a drive for me to do certain things, and also combined with certain important messages I think that need to be told. And so I can use my voice to do that.
Yeah, along with that, I know you don't have a crystal ball and can't look into the future, but looking at Marcel Van Oosten 5 years from now, 10 years from now, do you have some visions of, not that we have expectations that things have to go a certain way, but how do you see things moving from here without putting pressure on yourself? It's another challenge that we all face.
Yeah. So yeah, that pressure I naturally push on myself, but not in a negative way. I'm not stressed by it. Yeah, it's a difficult question because it's actually something that I'm constantly thinking about. Like, and in many ways, this book is the main reason. So for 15 years, I've just been doing what I do. And then during COVID, I spent 14 months working on that book. And I wanted, when it was finished, it almost felt like I closed a chapter, and a chapter of my life, and that I was ready for a new chapter. That's how the book felt when I held it in my hands. It was like, okay, ready for something else. So that's been going through my head. At the same time, I absolutely love what I'm doing, and I don't have enough yet. So it's very likely that in 5 years, I'll still be doing what I do now. How that's going to be in 10 years, I'm not entirely sure. I have a lot of ideas, but I'm not sure what direction everything will go.
It sounds like we've been following a somewhat similar path, and that in some ways the COVID was a blessing for me, in that it was an opportunity when the time was right and people approached me about doing a book. I said, okay, this is the time to do it. And so you and I published around the same time, actually with the same publishing company.
Publisher, yeah.
Yeah, same publisher.
Ah.
So it's kind of ironic. And I've also been thinking about, I want to keep doing this. I'm heading off to India in 2 days and then Bhutan, but what's going to be 5 years from now? So yeah. It's interesting.
Yeah, it is interesting. Yeah.
There's another question here. How many months of the year do you travel? And what about your tours? You take people, I think it says so on your website, right?
Yeah, so in an average year, so that's a non-COVID year, my wife and I are on the road 9 months approximately. So 9 months a year we're traveling, and 3 months a year we are not traveling. And so what we do is we host photographic tours. So we run photographic safaris mostly for small groups of photography enthusiasts from all over the world, and we teach them about the subjects and about the photography. So basically, I'm trying to teach them to become a better photographer and to take better pictures. So that's the main source of my income. I should probably explain why, very short. Being a wildlife photographer, it is very difficult to make a living because the subject matter that I photograph has been around for ages and it doesn't change. So photographs of an elephant taken 50 years ago can still be used. And so that means that there's not a lot of demand for the kind of photography that I do from a commercial point of view. That means you have to be creative and think of other ways to do that. So the photo tours is something we started 15 years ago as an alternative way to earn a living.
Okay, great. So John, do you have another question?
I think one of the things is we have about 10 minutes left, Marcel. So I'd like to kind of open it to you about other things that we haven't covered, but are important to you to share.
Cool. I have to improvise.
That's a tough question.
No, it is a tough
Marcel
question.
and I
Yeah.
were talking before I was coming up with some tough questions for him, and I
Not this tough.
Well, maybe I can intervene here and just say, what's your hope for the future in wildlife? Obviously, you've mentioned deforestation and just the greed, commercial greed of people who hunt animals. But is there a ray of hope?
Obviously, there's always hope. Without hope, we would all be incredibly depressed. So I also have hope. Otherwise, I wouldn't even try to do what I do. However, one also needs to be realistic. So looking at human nature, especially with regards to the environment and to animals, we just know from history that people tend to get active and start caring about species when it's almost too late. And this is how we've lost already so many species, and not like small ones, even like big ones. I mean, we're about to lose the black rhino and maybe the white rhino as well. And the reason is always that we care more about our economy. That's usually what governments decide, and it's also how people vote. So the primary reason for voting is always money. So people vote for the party that's best for their wallet, and that means that government may not have the best interest of the wildlife and of the environment at heart. So in that way, I'm a bit pessimistic. At the same time, it's a good thing now that with social media, the internet in general, and how quickly you can bring a message across. I can post something on the internet, and by the end of the day, many thousands of people will have seen it. Some of them will have shared it. So that's really the positive and the hopeful thing. Mm-hmm. So I'm just hoping that more and more people will start using it for good, and also start looking a little bit further than, especially in Western democracies, so in the so-called rich countries, to not only think about money and economy, but also think about the future and the future of our children and future generations, because they might actually grow up without seeing a tiger and without seeing a rhino or a polar bear, because we will have we will have been too late.
There is one more question here, and it's built on you're talking about the monkey, the little chimp monkey that held your finger. And so the question is, have you ever had a specific connection that will stay with you forever? One of those goosebump moments.
Well, actually, I think that is the one, I would say. Yeah, because it is extremely rare to get in physical contact with a wild animal. Actually, it's something that you try to avoid because wild animals are unpredictable, and it can have a negative effect, or the animal can harm me. So usually try to avoid that. But in that particular case, it just happened, and it is just wonderful, because that's the closest you can get to wildlife. Yeah.
So I want to thank both Marcel and John. This has been really wonderful. This is where we go into a kind of commercial break, just to let you know what's happening with the charter. But it's because of people like you and your contributions that we have the ability to do the kinds of things that we have been doing. So thank you so much. And I'd like to share just a few slides with you so that you have them on your save the list. Our next global read in May 18th, is with Elizabeth Filippoli from Greece. She's written a most incredible book, From Women to the World, Letters for a New Century. And then that will be facilitated by Lenore Stepsich, who is right now the CEO of the Montessori European Group, and who she has worked with in the past. In terms of, we are trying so hard to make Earth Day, Earth Month, Earth Year. So we will continue with our brand new film series that we started this year with the Connectivity Project. It's a documentary and it will be available for a number of days from April 26th through May 2nd. And if people have not had an opportunity to read the encyclical by Pope Francis, Laudato Si, which is on the environment and Earth as our common home, there will be a discussion on April 27th of the encyclical. And all of the times that we list are Pacific times, so that you can check both out on the world clock and then also on our website. There's a special discussion by one of our partners on healing the waters on May 1st at 5:01 p.m. Pacific time. And in terms of our course offerings in this end of the month that we're heading for, our Charter Education Institute will be offering a class starting on April 25th with Diane Kellen-Sucre, who has written a book called Safe Cities or Save Our Cities. And this particular course lasts for 4 weeks, fostering a compassionate community. And then we're very honored to have a session with Thomas Hubble on April 26th. And many of you know that he is the expert in looking at collective trauma globally. And this particular introduction of a course, it's just 90 minutes, but it is a preview to a 5-month commitment of a joint course offered by Thomas Hubble, the Pocket Project, and the Charter for Compassion. So thank you so much again, and we hope you'll join us in one of these other offerings. Thank you so much, Marcel. And don't forget, folks, that John Colkin, who actually didn't talk much about his projects, but you'll have an opportunity to see his work in December. And I have a feeling that he'll be joining us for a few other things as well. Goodbye, everyone.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good luck with your book, John.
Yes.